Hey everyone, I'm John Negroni. I am the film editor for theyoungfolks.com. I'm also the host of the Cinemaholics podcast. I am back from my vacation, had a great time. I actually just got back from Disneyland, if you can't tell over there. And so great precursor for the film that I'm going to be talking about right now. And I'm excited because this is going to be a huge week in film, lots of films coming out. So stick around for the end of this review for a little bit of a preview of what else I've got coming up. But for now, let's talk about Encanto. So Encanto is a new animated musical from two of the minds behind Zootopia, Tangled, and a few other recent Disney animation films that I think, these films have been rightfully praised for stretching beyond the limits of what audiences want from Disney, this juggernaut studio that we know as Disney. Now that they've transitioned from hand-drawn animation into full-blown computer animation, which helps realize, I think, even the most complicated ambitions from people who make movies. So with Encanto, you have these filmmakers, directors, Jared Bush, Byron Howard, Charisse Castro-Smith, who was kind of brought in, I think, later on, and is technically a co-director. I don't know how technically. I know she has a co-screenwriter credit. It's a little complicated, and I don't have all the info, but they're essentially supposed to be the three main people who brought this movie about. And I think that with Encanto, they've maybe brought some of that new guard energy we've been seeing from the last decade or so of Disney animation into what I think is one of the warmest, most wholehearted Disney films in years, and I was super happy to say that. So Encanto itself, not the movie, is a fictional, halfway mythical setting located in Colombia. That's Colombia with an O, of course. The story takes place in the modern day around this magical madrigal family. So they're magical, they're named Madrigal. A little hard to say that, but there you go. And this Madrigal family, they're an eccentric bunch. All of them each are gifted with a single supernatural ability. And to be super clear, these supernatural abilities, they're not super unique. Like we've seen these like superpowers, right? And all kinds of other things. So a few brief examples. One of them has incredible strength. Another one can hear a pin drop from miles away. You have another one who can shapeshift and so on. It has a morsel of that manic Incredibles unpredictability in terms of the superpowers and how the powers invade that family dynamic. It's not like Jack necessarily, it doesn't go that far, but it is pretty all over the place. And what's interesting, though, about this compared to something like The Incredibles is that it's the extended family, too. So you also have cousins, aunts, uncles, siblings. There's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot more to the family dynamic. And they all live, interestingly, inside an enchanted house or casita that can do all kinds of quirky, magical things, too. So all's fine and well in Encanto, except that one of the youngest among the Madrigal family, her name is Mirabel. She's voiced by Brooklyn Nine-Nine Stephanie Beatriz. And Mirabel, she's the only one in the family who never got her miracle. They call it that. And nobody knows why. It just sort of didn't happen for her. So amongst all of her amazing, larger-than-life siblings who can do all these incredible things, and, they don't just have these powers just to have them. Like, they do things like for the community, too. Like, their powers help people who also live in this village. It's not just them in this one location, and that's it. There's an entire community around their house, but they're kind of the center of attention, and they're kind of tucked away in isolation in the Colombian mountains. If this movie gets a sequel, I think it's probably going to get into that a little bit, but in this movie, it doesn't. And so in this really tough circumstance that Mirabel finds herself in, she just kind of looks at her situation and she feels a bit aimless, right? She feels a bit out of sorts. She loves her family more than anything, but she doesn't quite know how to fit in and make herself feel useful to everybody else. Super relatable. So anyway, it's hopefully not too much to say that I think, in my opinion, the typical Disney film has a bit of a worn formula when it comes to plot structure. This isn't like a criticism against all Disney films or all films that do this, but we see it so many times. Characters are in one place, things go wrong, characters leave and go on a riveting quest, usually in pairs, and then they pick up a few friends along the way, the crisis gets resolved. I mean, we've seen it so many times, and I think what's immediately alluring about Encanto to me is that the driving narrative, the what happens of this movie is really different from something we've seen in some other Disney movies. They kind of just sit still. that basically the whole movie takes place in this one place. And thank goodness, because it is an interesting place. It's a place they put all this effort and detail and work into bringing about. One thing that I think maybe sometimes animation filmmakers can sometimes fall into this trap of building out these beautiful worlds, but then we barely spend time in them. I don't want to give examples because I don't want to make it sound like it's a negativity, because sometimes it's such a great thing to watch a movie and you just keep getting more and more places and more places. I like that Encanto is doing something a little different. It's just in one place and you really soak it all in. I think the audience can soak it all in. They can enjoy all the vibrant detail and the foibles of this family. They're so amusing constantly. And it's also nice because you avoid all the detours and all the distractions, and now we got to throw in this character. We have to bring back this other crisis that's going to make the end of the movie exciting, and stuff that you can sort of pick out as formula and get a little bit wary from watching. And I was pretty pleasantly surprised with how Encanto sort of just does its own thing. Kind of like the characters in this movie. It kind of does its own thing. So I also want to mention the music in Encanto. It really hits all the right notes, everything it needs to do. I mean, they found a way to infuse, of course, the lush sounds of Colombian culture with pretty hummable pop lyrics. I'll be honest, not all of the music is as good as some of the music. Lin-Manuel Miranda developed the songs just like he did in Moana, and I think Moana has a superior soundtrack just in terms of, like, if I'm going to listen to a soundtrack, I would rather listen to Moana start to finish, because every one of those songs I actually really like. In this movie, some of them are a little hit or miss, but this movie, Encanto, it has a third act tune that really just changes the game. It changes the movie. I mean, it's a hauntingly somber piece that I don't know about anybody else, but for me, it triggered waterfalls of tears, and it might for you, I don't know. But what's great about it is that it kind of saves the third act of this movie in a lot of ways, and obviously I can't get into detail there. So a few more things that are a bit more overall, more general. I think there were a lot of scattered joys to be discovered all over Encanto, both the film and the location itself. There's an opening song number that kind of nicely lays out. It's a little annoying and pedantic the way they do it, but it's a good idea and it works, where the song kind of lays out all the exposition of, like, who is who and who's related to who and what are their powers, what can they do, all that stuff in one song, just to kind of get it out of the way. It's a little hard to follow though. It's very, like, sometimes I didn't fully get what people were saying. It was kind of difficult to parse out because the speed of the thing was pretty intense. But I think in most ways, like, that's a kind of an isolated thing, because the music and I would say the voice acting is really sharp here. Really great vocals. I really, really love Mirabel in this movie. I think Beatriz brought this character to life in a way that made me think she was born to voice this character. I didn't know that it was Stephanie Beatriz until the credits came up and I saw that it was her, and I was like, oh yeah, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. We also saw her in The Heights earlier this year. She got a little bit of singing done in that, and yeah, she really brought it in this movie. I'm really impressed with her vocal performance here. It really sticks out, and it really, I think, is one of the most important things that people don't tend to talk about in animated films. Your main character, they really bring a lot of the charm and personality, and I thought she did that as well. This is a character who actually feels like a true-to-life person in animated form, and I thought that her voice and her movements and the way she did everything was in basically perfect sync, at least for me. John Leguizamo, I also wanted to bring him up. He should get some notice here, I think, as a character who comes in a little bit later, to be honest, and he doesn't stay for too long, but he makes such an instant impression, and it lasts. It's kind of hard not to wish that he could have stuck around for the entire movie, but it's great what we get. So I got to sum it up here. Yeah, Encanto, it's a wholesome, delightful movie. It has so much heart. It's no wonder every frame of this thing is bursting with color and, like I said before, personality. And down to the casita itself, it constantly moves around like a Hogwarts in South America and paradise, invoking that same wonder of magical realism without getting too fantastical and bizarre. Essentially, I think the film borrows a lot of the world building and finesse you'd see from a high concept Pixar film, but with the more sleek, poppy appeal of one of the more recent Disney animation films, like Ralph Breaks the Internet, for example, like Moana to some extent, and Frozen 2. And that's really what you get in terms of the characters, their personality, their energy. It is very Disney animation. And one way like that, it is pretty consistent. The only real issues I have are, well, there's a few. First of all, I think that some of the storytelling is a little bit too tidy toward the end. Some of the things that get brought up and happen here didn't quite make sense to me. There's a love triangle that happens all of a sudden that really feels like it comes out of nowhere, and it's supposed to be a big moment. It's supposed to make you feel like, wow, yes, it's stuff like that. And I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing, and so I didn't really care. But it's a almost blink and you'll miss it kind of thing. It's not that big of a deal in terms of the overall movie. But a bigger problem, I think, is that there's a bit of a rushness to the third act. It feels a bit hurried, and it falls a little bit flat in some ways, while in other ways it's profoundly emotional. And like I said before, it's arguably saved by a single song and a flashback sequence that is so good. I genuinely, walking out of the theater, was like, man, that is a moment, that is like an Up kind of thing that just happened. Like, that is such a good scene, and it happens in a movie where everything else around it, I mean, it's kind of funny too, because they're both movies that take place in South America, so I didn't even make that connection before, but there you go. Yeah, it makes the surrounding movie feel better because of how good that scene is. I can't wait to rewatch the movie just for that scene. Like, that's how good I thought it was. And that said, all of the dramatic tension that's like building itself in this movie, it gets its big moment, and it gets all the stuff that you expect, right? Where, we're going to have this big blow up, we're going to have a third act, and then everything is going to go and unbelievably insane. And then the movie, I don't know, it just kind of, if I had to do a baseball metaphor, it's setting itself for a home run, like the pitch is there. The batter has perfect form, they go for it, and then, then they just bunt it. And then it just feels like we're doing that so we can get to the credits. I was a little confused by how the third act sort of resolves itself. Maybe on rewatch, I'd maybe pick up on a few things because my expectations would be different. I don't know. But you look, if the only glaring issues in your movie are that, especially one that took 5 years to make, or that it finishes up a little too soon and not all the conflict is as gripping, then I think a lot of people are probably going to dig this a lot, and I hope they do, because I think this movie, like the name of the movie in Spanish, Charm, Encanto, Charm, I think it has charm for days. It's going to get people dancing. It's going to get people having a good time. And that's what it comes down to for me. I think there will be tons of conversations about this movie in terms of the representation here and some of the, glaring, I think, cultural issues at play where we don't really have anybody. I don't believe anyone who's Colombian was really involved in this movie, at least in like the bigger, I don't know about the vocal talent, but I don't think like any of the creative talent behind the scenes was involved in making this movie, which is a bit glaring. I mean, we do have Latina, representation here and there. I don't have all the facts on that, though. It isn't something I thought about while watching the movie, though. It's something that kind of after the fact, I was like, oh, those are the guys who did that. And, I just didn't really expect this to be a movie that wasn't, in terms of, if you're talking about authenticity, it's not a film that's as authentic in terms of like the people who made it. But I did get the impression that they did their homework. And that said, I'm not Colombian, I'm Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans, eventually I think Puerto Ricans come from Colombia, or like the same kind of, the historical stuff. Like, we're all kind of in the same cohort if you go back thousands of years, whatever. The point is, I can't really speak for Colombians, and I'm curious to read what they have to say about this movie and how it comes across. I could see some interesting conversations happening about, what are we sort of getting from our Latina, stories, and like the way that like our worlds are depicted. Sometimes it can be a little bit glossy, it can be a bit packaged and corporatized and pretty weird ways, or at least weird to some people. I'm pretty open-minded to hearing people out and what they have to say about that, one way or the other. But that's what I have to say about Encanto for now. Encanto from Disney is going to open in theaters on November 24th, so the day before American Thanksgiving. It already premiered at the El Capitan, and yeah, I saw this movie about a week ago. I have thought about it a lot since, maybe only because I was at Disney, so like, how could I not? But it's a really, really lovely Disney film. I hope a lot of you who have been looking forward to it and do check it out have your expectations met, and that's always what we hope for. All right, that's it for me. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we got lots of stuff coming up. Ghostbusters Afterlife is happening. Seeing that tomorrow. Also, King Richard is happening this week. Can't wait for that. The big thing, for me at least, is Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time comes out, and I have so much stuff I want to talk about with Wheel of Time. I'm going to be doing written things for Wheel of Time, though, so you will have to check that out. I don't know if I'm going to be doing videos on Wheel of Time. Additionally, I'm going to be seeing House of Gucci and Licorice Pizza, maybe Red Rocket this week, so I'm going to have my hands full with a lot of stuff. And so if there's something in particular that you want me to get to that I haven't yet, please let me know. I'm always reading the comments, and I'm always looking forward to what you all have to say in terms of what you hope that I talk about. It's weird to even think that's the case, but yeah.